for this week, Parshat Chayei Sarah.
And a quick thought from you.
Thank you so much, Mons. Actually, a few days ago, I was speaking to a young history buff.
Wow,
and when I asked him about his favorite historical moment, he told me about an extraordinary episode following the Second World War, which I was inspired to research further after our conversation. The story goes that Hiroo Onoda was a Japanese soldier who fought in World War II, but did not surrender at the end of the war in 1945. Hiding in the mountains of the Philippines, the first time Hiroo saw a leaflet announcing that Japan had surrendered was in October 1945. And the leaflet read, "The war ended on the 15th of August, come down from the mountains." But he distrusted the leaflet, believing that it was Allied propaganda. This happened several more times, and on each occasion, Hiroo dismissed the leaflets as untrue. On the 20th of February 1974, Hiroo met a Japanese man called Norio, who was on a mission in the Philippines to find three things: a large panda bear, a creature known as the Yeti, and Lieutenant Hiroo Onoda. "Well," said Hiroo to the man, "I'm happy to help you look for the panda and Yeti, but that lieutenant, we'll never find him." As it turned out, the two men became friends, and Hiroo let Norio into a secret. He said, "Norio, I'm hiding here and not prepared to surrender until the fulfillment of a promise. My commander in the war told me, no matter what happens, we will come back for you. And I'm waiting for that to happen. Until then, I will not come home." With this news, Norio returned to Japan, showing photos of himself and Hiroo as proof of their encounter. He then traveled back to the Philippines with Hiroo's commander, who after the war had become a bookseller. Commander and lieutenant embraced. The promise was upheld, and everyone returned back home to Japan. By the way, as part of his formal surrender, Hiroo handed over his sword, a rifle with 500 rounds of ammunition, several hand grenades, and a dagger that his mother had given him to kill himself if he was captured by the enemy. Quite a story, and what a piece of history. So Hiroo was waiting for a promise to be fulfilled, which is a relevant theme in biblical history too. In fact, in our portion of Chayei Sarah, we come across this very idea. Abraham had been promised, Abraham was promised descendants and that he would inherit land. God said to him, "Look at the stars, your future will be as bright and numerous as they are." Yet now, in this parasha, we read about Abraham 60 years on from that promise, with no land of his own, to the point that he had to negotiate with Ephron for a sale to get a burial plot where he could bury his wife Sarah, because Abraham doesn't yet own any of his own land despite God's promise 60 years before that. But Abraham didn't complain. There's no sign of distrust or resentment while he is waiting for God's promise to be fulfilled. And I wonder to myself, what was the secret of Abraham? Bit of background noise. Everyone. So, what are you thinking about Abraham's patience? What's the secret? Well, God engineered camels in an intriguing way. And as the camel is mentioned 54 times in the Torah, 18 of which are in this portion of Chayei Sarah, I think there is something to learn from the camel about God's promises, Abraham's patience, and the relevance of promises in our own lives. When it comes to promises, there are three particular features of the camel to focus on. The first is that it chews the cud, but doesn't have split hooves. So of the two kosher signs, the camel has one. This symbolizes the fact that in life, there are kosher moments, the good times, and also non-kosher or challenging times. During a tricky patch, we don't surrender, just like Hiroo didn't surrender. We hold out for the good times, And the reason for that is the camel's second feature, its hump. The hump tells us that even if a promise hasn't been fulfilled yet, there is always more to come being stored in that hump. But most important in the design of the camel is its third feature, and that's the name of its brand. In Hebrew, a camel is called gamal. And you can hear in the word, it's linked to another Hebrew word, gemilut chasadim, kindness. Abraham personified kindness. And I believe that the 18 times a camel appears in this week's portion is an illustration of the way that Abraham took his kindness and carried it with him when he left home. And he shared it with everyone that he met on his journey with his camels through the desert. So the biggest message of the camel is that journeys may take time and promises are not always fulfilled immediately. But our job as human beings in this world is to be like Abraham, who didn't become frustrated while waiting for the promise. Instead, he went about doing his thing with acts of kindness for everyone, everywhere, believing that as he showed kindness to others, so too, God's kindness towards him would surely follow. When we're born, we are given the promise of a life in this world. Thank God, generally, in our circumstances, that's the promise of our life being full of opportunity, goodness, and blessing. Even if it takes time for the promise to be completely fulfilled,
Amen.
and even if there are twists and turns on the way, our task is to draw from history, thinking about Hiru, the Japanese soldier who waited 30 years for a promise, and Abraham who waited over 60 years. As long as we are living with the symbol of the camel, by performing acts of kindness, then we're doing our bit to bring good things to the world, and hopefully good things will come to us too. May it be a week filled to over the brim with blessings.
Amen.
Shabbat shalom, everybody.